Gentlemen, start your engines. If you're a racing fan, nothing brings more excitement and anticipation than these four simple words. Hello, my name's John Kowalski, and welcome to the greatest moments in the history of NASCAR. Brought to you by Biography Software, the leader in biographical multimedia entertainment software. For the next 90 minutes or so, we'll share some of the greatest moments in NASCAR's history. You'll see racing at its best through our collection of rarely seen photos and videos. You'll hear actual interviews from the historic Gene Granger Show as Gene talks with some of the sport's greatest legends. And you'll be able to test your NASCAR knowledge from within our Hall of Fame. We'll start this event with a brief history of NASCAR's beginnings in the late 40s and into the 50s. Then we'll move into the 60s and 70s, paved tracks, and of course the Richard Petty era. After that, it's on to the 80s with the legendary Dale Earnhardt and DW, Darrell Waltrip. From there, it's NASCAR in the 90s, America's fastest growing sport. We'll also show you some of the greatest tracks in motorsports and profile a few of NASCAR's greatest drivers. And don't forget the families of NASCAR, names like Allison and Jarrett and Earnhardt. Then we'll go behind the scenes for a look at some of NASCAR's top racing teams. And finally, we'll take a peek into the future with a look at some of the top new drivers. So for now, strap yourself in for a fast ride as we show you some of the greatest moments in the history of NASCAR.
In the beginning, racing in the 40s and 50s.
You can't talk about the history of NASCAR without devoting a generous portion of your discussion to the France family. NASCAR's entire existence, in fact, is due in large part to the determination and effort of one family member in particular who founded the organization, Big Bill France. William Henry Getty France was born on September the 26th, 1909 in Washington, D.C. At a young age, he became fascinated with the idea of racing automobiles. He married a nurse named Ann Bledsoe in 1931, and 3 years later, the young couple moved to Florida with their new baby boy, William Jr., where Big Bill opened a gas station in Daytona Beach. Racing seemed to be pretty popular in the South, and Big Bill even entered a few races himself. And then he tried something he had never done before. In 1938, he promoted a race. It was a very special kind of race with half the track on the Highway A1A and the other half on Daytona Beach itself. There were a few glitches, but overall the results were encouraging. Big Bill began to see a real potential in racing. France promoted several more races, but then World War II broke out and everything took a back seat to the war effort. When the war was over, France continued with his Daytona Beach races. He saw that this form of racing in which anybody with an American street car could enter had enormous appeal to the average fan. He wanted to organize this stock car racing as a separate class of racing, complete with rules, a race schedule, and everything that went with it. But the reaction of the American Automobile Association, the sanctioning body for special forms of motorsports, was lukewarm at best. France would have to do it on his own. With his vision in mind, France organized a meeting of all those in the racing world who were interested in his idea. In December of 1947, 35 men gathered at the Streamline Hotel in Daytona Beach to begin hammering out a plan. They created a board of governors, and France was chosen as president. Red Voigt was the one who suggested the name of the new organization, NASCAR, the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing. The first NASCAR race was held on February the 15th, 1948 at the Daytona Beach and Road Course. Red Byron, who was one of the men who participated in the organizational meetings 2 months earlier, won the race. Just 1 week after the event, NASCAR was officially incorporated. Now, although NASCAR was now an official body, it would be more than a year before the first strictly stock race was held. The strictly stock division included American passenger cars with parts limited to only those listed in the manufacturer's catalog. In other words, these were street cars that anyone could buy at a dealership. When NASCAR was first formed, there was only the modified class, which was popular among serious racing enthusiasts, but not with the general public. President Bill France Sr. wanted a new kind of race, one that would appeal to anybody and everybody. After all, he reasoned the average man on the street didn't own a modified car. However, people were always buying cars from dealerships, and consumers were always interested in buying the best product available. So why not stage races that allowed the public to see how the cars they bought stacked up against the competition? So in the spring of 1949, it was announced that a strictly stock event would be held on June the 19th of that year at a 3/4-mile dirt track in Charlotte, North Carolina. The rules for the cars were simple. It had to be an American-made car with no modifications except an allowable metal plate to protect the right front wheel. Now, little did anyone know that this race would lay down the groundwork for the Grand National Division, which of course ultimately would evolve into the NASCAR Winston Cup Series of today. The event quickly drew 33 drivers with cars from Buick, Cadillac, Chrysler, Ford, Hudson, Kaiser, Lincoln, Mercury, and Oldsmobile. Even more promising was the attendance in the stands on race day, over 13,000. France had been right. When the race began, Atlanta's Flock brothers were the ones to beat. With a qualifying time of a little under 68 miles per hour, Bob Flock had the pole, with brothers Tim in the front row and Fonte at the inside of the third row. But nobody was faster in the race that day than Glenn Dunaway, who drove his 1947 Ford to take the checkered flag with a 3-lap lead over Jim Roper and his 1949 Lincoln. Now, it wasn't until after the race that the technical inspector made an interesting discovery. The rear springs on Dunaway's car had been altered for better stability. Dunaway was promptly disqualified, and Roper was the new winner. Now, knowing he was on a roll, France went ahead and planned 9 more strictly stock races that year, beginning with the 6th race at Martinsville. The new class was named the Grand National Division, the top division in NASCAR's lineup. Red Byron finished this inaugural season with the most points to become NASCAR's first strictly stock champion. The next year, 1950, France increased the number of races to 21, and Bill Rexford took NASCAR's 2nd championship. It was during this second full season that Harold Brasington completed the first paved superspeedway near Darlington, South Carolina. The first race at Darlington was held on Labor Day in 1950. Won by Johnny Mance in a 1950 Plymouth, the Southern 500 was born. With the fledgling NASCAR organization off and running, France turned his attention to promoting the sport and helping it grow from a regional pastime in the southern states to a national presence. He proved to be very creative in his marketing efforts. One such event took place at the Detroit Fairgrounds in 1951, when France proposed a unique way to mark the celebration of the city's 250th anniversary. A 250-mile race with each lap representing 1 year of the city's history. The event, which captured the essence of Detroit's rich automotive heritage, was a resounding success. The Motor City 250 was one of the best things that ever happened to NASCAR. Auto manufacturers were able to grasp the enormous marketing potential of stock car racing. Car companies began touting the success of their vehicles in various NASCAR races and even began supplying high-performance NASCAR-compliant parts to teams in the hopes of boosting performance. This was factory backing in its early stages. Now, toward the mid-1950s, NASCAR's future and the future of auto racing in general became bleak when a couple of high-profile accidents resulted in hysterical legislators calling for laws to ban all forms of motor racing in this country and in other nations. Now, the AAA, the major auto racing governing body in the U.S. throughout the history of the sport, abandoned it. Its contest board reorganized as the United States Auto Club, USAC, and its leaders, along with Big Bill France, helped save the sport with their efforts before the U.S. Congress. 2 things greatly improved NASCAR's image from that point on. One of these was Edward Glenn Fireball Roberts. Roberts had been a NASCAR driver since the Grand National Division's 2nd season. In fact, he almost won the championship that year. His 2nd place finish was the closest he would ever come to winning it. Roberts had already earned 14 of his 32 career victories by the start of the 1958 season. And in a time when auto racing needed a true role model, Roberts filled that order. He brought a youthful charisma to the sport, and his background was that of a talented baseball pitcher and University of Florida engineering student rather than the unsavory pedigree of a bootlegger. In 1958, Roberts put his foot to the floor and wowed fans with one amazing race after another. He led almost half of the laps he ran that year, and in his effort did not go unnoticed by the rest of the world. Here was something to watch, somebody to root for. Now, while Roberts had somewhat redeemed NASCAR and recaptured the interest of its fans, it was 1959 that really reunited America with motorsports. Bill France had realized that in racing, as in many other things, bigger is better. He had devoted a lot of time and energy to building bigger and better tracks. This served two purposes. Bigger tracks meant faster and more exciting races, and they also meant bigger seating areas for more fans and more revenues. For several years, Big Bill had been working on a new track for Daytona. The Southern 500 was the original 500-mile stock car race, and Darlington Raceway was the original Southern Superspeedway. But the Daytona 500 quickly became NASCAR's signature race, and Daytona International Speedway its flagship speedway. The 1959 Daytona 500 represented the inaugural run of the future classic race at the new track. The race itself, while exciting to the record crowd that attended that day, was nothing compared to what happened at the checkered flag and the events that ensued over the next 3 days. It was the finish of Lee Petty and Johnny Beauchamp, who crossed the line together with Joe Weatherly's lapped car, that created such turmoil. When NASCAR President Bill France Sr. looked down at the passing cars, he announced that Beauchamp had won the race. Petty, however, insisted that he had won the race, and he was supported by his crew and members of the media, plus a group of fans who were able to witness the close finish from their seats. Meanwhile, Beauchamp took the trip to Victory Lane, where after a brief moment of uncertainty, he contended that he had indeed won the race by about a foot. Petty, however, was fuming. He knew he had won, and he lobbied long and hard to anyone and everyone who would listen to him. Things started to get a little heated up. The debate raged for several hours. Finally, France made a decision: declare the race unofficial until a winner could be determined using the photos and movies of the event. Over the next couple of days, NASCAR acquired every photo and piece of film it could in an effort to settle the matter. As officials began to view the footage, one thing was clear: Petty, not Beauchamp, had won the race. Petty, of course, remained in Daytona pending the outcome. He felt confident that he would be vindicated in the final decision, and he was. Almost 3 days after the finish of the race, France announced that Lee Petty had won the Daytona 500. He also announced that from that point on, a camera would be installed at the finish line and used to determine the winner.
Racing in the 60s and 70s.
In the 1960s, paved tracks began popping up all around the country, with the first of these being Charlotte Motor Speedway, Marchbank Speedway in California, and the Atlanta International Raceway. This was also a decade for some of the best drivers ever. Several names dominated the Grand National Circuit, including Ned Jarrett, Joe Weatherly, Richard Petty, and David Pearson. But while Pearson's 3 titles in just 4 years during the 60s set a new championship record, nothing compares to what Petty did in 1967. In 49 starts, Petty won 27 races, with a string of 10 straight victories near the end of the year on the way to his second championship. The miraculous season crowned Petty as King Richard in the world of NASCAR. In February of 1963, Dwayne Lewis Lund, nicknamed Tiny Lund, went to the Daytona 500 in the hopes of finding an owner who was willing to give him a chance behind the wheel. Now, while standing around the track with some friends after lunch, a Maserati being tested by Marvin Panch flipped over and burst into flames. Lund, along with drivers Ernie Gahan and Bill Wimble, Steve Petrosick of Firestone, and Holman Moody team mechanic Jerry Rayborn, raced over to the burning car and helped free Panch from the twisted metal. Panch was rushed to the hospital with severe burns. During his recovery, the injured driver requested that Lund take his place in the Daytona 500. The Wood brothers agreed, and remarkably, Lund took the checkered flag in his first NASCAR Winston Cup Series race. The 1970s saw some of the biggest changes in NASCAR's history. In 1970, something happened that would catapult NASCAR into homes across America. ABC, which had been showing selected segments of NASCAR races since the early 60s, announced that it would broadcast 9 races. On December 10, 1970, the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company announced an agreement with NASCAR in which it would sponsor the Grand National Division. Hereafter, the top NASCAR division would be named the NASCAR Winston Cup Series. The first race under his new arrangement was the Motor Trend 500 on January the 10th, 1971. The following year, in 1972, NASCAR reduced the number of races from 60 or more to around 30 and instituted a new point system to establish its winners. The point system was revised again in 1975, and for the most part, it is still in use today. In 1979, the first major NASCAR event to be fully broadcast on television, the Daytona 500, promised to be an exciting event. And there were plenty of TV viewers for the race thanks to an East Coast snowstorm that kept most folks indoors that Sunday. But while everyone figured the race would be thrilling to watch, no one could have predicted the incident afterward. The race had pretty much run smoothly until the final 30 miles. That's when Donnie Allison and Cale Yarborough began an electrifying duel for the lead. The feud continued up to the last lap, at which point Allison was in front with Yarborough right behind him. On the backstretch, Yarborough prepared to slingshot past Allison. Running side by side, the two cars bumped each other, pushing Yarborough onto the infield grass. Yarborough then drove back onto the track, and the two cars hit again. Then once more at turn 3, sending each of them up the track, hitting the wall. Now, holding Darrell Waltrip and A.J. Foyt at bay, Richard Petty passed the wrecked cars of Yarborough and Allison in the third turn on his way to taking the checkered flag. What happened next was right out of a TV movie. After his car stopped, Yarborough jumped out and went to confront Donnie Allison. Needless to say, a scuffle broke out, and it turned into a free-for-all with Yarborough on one end and the Allison brothers on the other. Eventually, some employees at the track broke up the fight, but not until NASCAR had given TV viewers a truly unforgettable glimpse into the world of racing. It was during this decade, with NASCAR's future assured, Big Bill France stepped down from his position as president. His successor was none other than his son, William Clifton France. The transfer of power was indicative of the general evolution that was occurring in NASCAR. Two drivers sat on top of the NASCAR world, Richard Petty and Cale Yarborough. Together, they accounted for 8 of the decade's 10 championships. By the end of the 70s, Petty had won his 7th title, and Yarborough had become the first NASCAR driver ever to win 3 straight titles. It was also time for the pioneer drivers, the ones who had been with NASCAR since its beginnings, to depart. David Pearson and Cale Yarborough were winding down their storied careers, while a new generation of names would soon be heard: Dale Earnhardt, Bill Elliott, and D.W. Darrell Waltrip, among others.
Racing in the 80s.
The 1980s marked the beginning of a new era of drivers, led by Dale Earnhardt and Darrell Waltrip, who each won 3 titles during this time. The list of champions in the 80s also included Bobby Allison, Bobby Labonte, Bill Elliott, and Rusty Wallace. Along with NASCAR's latest personalities came the advent of cable television, and ESPN was leading the way on that front. Stock car racing became a real media production as sports coverage in general experienced an influx of technology and viewership. For those without cable television, CBS was there with its live coverage of events such as the Daytona 500. One of the most memorable races in the 80s was the 1980 World 600 at Charlotte Motor Speedway, featuring one of the greatest finishes in NASCAR Winston Cup history. The track's new pavement and some bad weather conditions combined to defeat several drivers during the race. Harry Gant was forced out after his 4th blown tire. Dale Earnhardt's blown tire contributed to a 4-car pileup with Cale Yarborough, David Pearson, and Bobby Allison. So it was Benny Parsons and Darrell Waltrip who ended up battling it out, staying side by side and stopping for fuel only once with just 40 laps left in the race. Exiting the pit, Waltrip took the lead and managed to keep it until lap 375. That's when Parsons jumped up to take the lead, but it didn't last long, and the pair swapped the front position 5 more times before the end of the race. In the final lap, Parsons grabbed the lead for the last time and won the race by just a half a car length. As if the Allison family hadn't made their presence known in NASCAR already, they definitely did at the 1988 Daytona 500. Darrell Waltrip initially held the lead for 69 laps, but was forced to give it up when his engine gave out with only 15 laps remaining. This left Bobby Allison and Davey Allison to battle it out for the checkered flag. Davey rode Bobby's bumper and made an attempt to take the lead in the third turn, but Bobby held strong. Bobby captured the win, his third at the Daytona 500, and set a record as the oldest driver to win a NASCAR Series race. This win topped off his victories earlier in the week in the 125-mile qualifying race and Goody's 300 for the Busch Series, making this the most incredible speed weeks of his career. Late in the decade marked Darrell Waltrip's 17th attempt to win the prestigious Daytona 500. Coming down to the last 20 laps, Dale Earnhardt and Ken Schrader led the pack. On lap 190, they both pitted, while Alan Kulwicki and Darrell Waltrip took over. It was a tight race until lap 197, when Kulwicki blew a tire. Waltrip was now in front and all alone. Waltrip faced a dilemma. He was due for refueling, but if he took the time to do so, he risked losing his best chance ever of winning the race he'd never won. Ignoring the waves of his crew chief, Waltrip pushed on. With just 22 gallons of fuel, Waltrip ran the last 53 laps. When his fuel pressure plummeted to 0, he started weaving the car back and forth across the track to push the last few drops of precious liquid into the fuel line. He knew that if his car sputtered, he was through. Through determination and sheer luck, somehow Waltrip held on to take the checkered flag on barely enough fumes to keep his car running.
Racing in the 90s.
The 1990s transformed NASCAR from a loose collection of drivers and fast cars into a national pastime. Suddenly, the NASCAR Winston Cup Series was finding fans in every segment of society, with more joining the ranks every day. NASCAR-related merchandise was flooding the market, and people were snatching it up. On the media front, the competition between two of the major broadcast networks, CBS and ABC, and cable outlets, ESPN, TNN, and TBS, intensified, bringing heightened exposure and revenue to the sport. Within a few short years of Bill France Sr.'s death in 1992, the NASCAR Winston Cup Series was drawing nearly 6 million fans to its 31 races, under the careful guidance of Bill Jr. This was also the decade for racing brothers Ward and Jeff Burton, and names like Tony Stewart, Sterling Marlin, Bobby Labonte, Dale Jarrett, Jimmy Spencer, and one driver who began his ascent to the NASCAR elite, Jeff Gordon. But the rest of the attention belonged to Dale Earnhardt, who in 1994 claimed his 7th NASCAR Winston Cup Series championship to tie Richard Petty for most championships ever won. One of the most memorable races in the 90s was the 1993 Daytona 500, where Dale Jarrett managed to fend off a challenging Dale Earnhardt for the win. Dale's father, Ned, was the announcer that day, and his broadcast of his own son winning the race ranks as one of the most emotional races ever run in NASCAR history. Up until 1994, the only race ever held at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway was the Indianapolis 500. But with the advent of the Brickyard 400, NASCAR Winston Cup racing finally came to the storied track. And oh, what a race. It was won by a Hoosier favorite, California-born Jeff Gordon, who grew up in nearby Pittsboro, Indiana. In May, Gordon had won his first NASCAR Winston Cup victory in the Coca-Cola World 600 at Charlotte. At first, the car to beat was that of Jeffrey Bodine, who had the lead through the first 100 laps. Unfortunately, brother Brett Bodine tapped Jeffrey's car, ending his hopes for a win. Young Jeff Gordon, who just managed to get around Bodine's whirling vehicle, suddenly found himself in the lead. At that point, Gordon thought that he'd have no trouble winning the race. He figured that all he had to do was keep calm and not make any mistakes. And after he began to pull away from Bodine, it looked like everything was going to go as smoothly as planned. But then another driver came up fast. Veteran Ernie Irvan, accompanied by a cluster of other drivers. The crowd of 300,000 watched as Irvan battled Gordon for almost 24 laps, swapping the lead several times. Each time one pulled ahead, the other would creep up beneath the leader's rear spoiler to loosen up the forward car. Then with just 4 laps to go, Irvan blew a tire, which put him out of the running. Gordon charged on and never looked back. He took the checkered flag with Brett Bodine a close second. It was only Gordon's second Winston Cup victory, and it came at the first ever Winston Cup race held at Indianapolis. Gordon, filled with emotion following the historic event, took an extra victory lap. He needed it. He had also just won a single race record purse of $613,000. When you ask people about the biggest race of the 90s, many, if not most, will point to the 1998 Daytona 500. Ever since his 1979 rookie season, Dale Earnhardt had wanted to win the Daytona 500. Having 7 NASCAR Winston Cup Series championships under his belt and wins at just about every track in the country, the prestigious Daytona 500 still eluded his list of accomplishments. Earnhardt had come so close to winning the big race several times, but each time fate would step in and deny him the one trophy he so desperately wanted. 1998 would be Earnhardt's year for the Daytona 500. After so many years of disappointment and watching other drivers take that victorious trip down victory lane, Earnhardt would finally claim his greatest prize. When Earnhardt took the checkered flag at the end of the race, everyone, absolutely everyone, wanted to be a part of the celebration. Even the normally reserved media got wrapped up in the event, cheering for the victor. And all the other crews lined up to slap hands with Earnhardt as he made his way to victory lane. And when he took a moment to make a few donuts in the infield grass, nobody complained. Although he waited so long to win the 500, Earnhardt was the winningest driver in Daytona history. With 34 triumphs in 125-mile qualifying races, Busch Clash Specials, NASCAR Busch Series events, IROC events, and July NASCAR Winston Cup races, as well as that 1998 Daytona 500. It would be just 3 years later that Earnhardt would be lost on the final lap of the fateful 2001 Daytona 500.
NASCAR's greatest tracks. Darlington Raceway.
In 1950, most thought Harold Brasington was more than a little crazy when he announced his plans to build a big paved track in a rural South Carolina tobacco field. But Harold remained undaunted, and he worked on the 1 1/4 speedway diligently. However, he did run into one roadblock that is evident in the track's design. During construction, Brasington wanted to have sweeping turns all around, but a stubborn farmer didn't want to sell his fish pond that sat right in the way of the proposed track. So Harold had to pinch that end of the track to fit in the allocated spot, creating the egg-shaped oval we know today. To this day, the fish pond remains, and so does the track's unique design. The 1 1/4 mile asphalt oval was ready for opening on schedule on Labor Day, Monday, September the 4th. In the inaugural event, Brasington, with the help of Bill France, assembled a 75-car field to compete for a $25,000 purse in the inaugural running of the Southern 500. Qualifying went on for 2 weeks. Ironically, Johnny Mance, the slowest qualifier for the event, drove his Plymouth to victory with a 9-lap margin. Fireball Roberts came in second, with Red Byron a close third. The banking on the track's turns was steepest at the top edge. In the early days, many drivers stayed on the nearly flat inside of the track, but the more daring ones found the going faster at the top, near the steel guardrail. Often the right rear fenders of the faster cars would scrape against the barrier, creating what came to be known as the Darlington Stripe. On Labor Day weekend in 1951, the track earned its own spot in NASCAR history. More than 82 cars representing 16 different makes arrived for the event, setting a record for the largest and most diverse field in the division's history. Marshall Teague started the race in 47th position and had taken the lead by the 13th lap in one of the most amazing charges ever witnessed in racing. Unfortunately, Teague was later taken out by an accident, but he was proud to watch Herb Thomas drive his other Hudson to victory lane.
Daytona International Speedway.
Daytona International Speedway is said to be the most famous track in NASCAR, hosting the granddaddy of stock car racing, the Daytona 500. Daytona Beach is where NASCAR was transformed from a dream to a reality. Bill France had an idea to move the storied track from the sands of Daytona Beach to a fast, high-banked asphalt track. It was only natural that Daytona Beach be chosen for NASCAR's flagship track. This was, after all, the site of NASCAR's first race, which was run on the old beach in road course February the 15th in 1948. The flat, hard-packed sand along the ocean's edge was also the former home of the land speed trials, and many records had been made and fallen here. After spending nearly 5 years to obtain financing and local support, Bill France broke ground for the construction of Daytona International Speedway on November the 25th, 1957. Initial cost of the project was put at about $3 million. 16 days earlier, France announced that the Daytona International Speedway Corporation was being organized and construction on the track would start within 30 days. He said the first race would be 500 miles and sanctioned